Welcome to the S.T.A.R podcast.
Whoa. S.T.A.R podcast.
Welcome to the S.T.A.R podcast, hosted by Nat. Each week, we share tips and stories from safety, trucking, and recruitment, and everything in between. Listen now. Today we're joined again by Renee, who you may have heard on our last episode 116, where she shared the story about her father's tragic workplace illness that he got from handling asbestos in the workplace. And if you have not listened to that, I would highly recommend you go back. It's an emotional episode, but it's very important highlight on workplace safety. And today's episode is emotional, and it could be triggering for some listeners. Just wanted to mention, because today we're listening to Renee as she shares her workplace violence story from her past. And I just want to thank Renee so much for her bravery, for being vulnerable and sharing this story. It's a sensitive topic, but it's so important to talk about and to raise awareness. And she gives some tips for how we can help each other stay safe in the workplace, and how employers can also help their employees feel safe and to really support them in a great way. So I want to thank Renee, and I also want to thank the Threads of Life, which again connected us with this excellent speaker and amazing person, and I hope you listen now. Can you share a little bit of information about how you've been affected personally by workplace safety or workplace violence?
Yeah, I can definitely share that. Quite a few years ago, I was at a work trip in Saskatchewan, and this was a project that, actually was going to be live on TV when we did one of the main parts of the demolition. So a lot of stress. And once I got there, there was a large coworker dinner. I was tired, I had jet lag, and I just wanted to eat dinner alone and make it a quick night. So everyone else was out for dinner. I just went somewhere close to my hotel. A coworker had reached out, and I told him, he had asked, "Oh, how come you're not here?" And I said, "Well, I'm over here. I'm not going to be out late." And he asked, "Hey, can I join you for dinner?" So I said, "Sure, that's fine." At that moment of dinner, there was a moment where I had this, something's off, right? And I was almost having this like internal conflict within myself. Like, of course I'm safe. This is my coworker. Like, I've worked with him for 6 years. Of course. I was having a glass of wine with my dinner, and he had asked, "Hey, do you want to just stop off at this one place? I'll bring you back to your hotel. We'll make it a short night." Okay, sure. So when we got to this second place, I took one sip of this wine, and then all of a sudden the world began to blur and sounds became muffled, and I ended up just going to the washroom. And I remember being on the bathroom floor, seeing like these black tiles and silver speckles, and I had a cold compress on my head. And I came out of the washroom and I said to him, "Oh my gosh, I am so sick. I need to go. I need to go to my hotel." And I could barely walk. So he said, "Yeah, okay, no problem. I'll get you to your hotel." "Okay, thank you." So he gets me into a cab, and I remember sitting behind the cab driver, and I can barely even make out his head. My vision was just so fuzzy and foggy. I don't even remember saying where my hotel was. So because I couldn't really walk, he ended up walking me to my hotel room, and then I didn't realize that he walked into the room behind me.
Oh dear.
Yeah. And so after that, I barely slept. And this was the big day. This whole demolition was going to be on TV. I probably had about 2 hours sleep. I called a friend, and it would have been, I think, 4 a.m. in Eastern time, saying what happened. And then I just kind of tried to block it out. But I also didn't start having flashbacks of what had happened at that time. A few days went by. I ended up telling my employer, "Look, this is what happened this night. Like, I was drugged and sexually assaulted." And my employer at the time just didn't really seem to believe me. And then at one point, I was told not to do site inspections in case there was gossip, instead of them actually addressing the gossip. And then at that time, part of this trauma that I was experiencing was I was waking up for years, but while I worked there after that, at 3 a.m. every single day. And they also ended up doing a third-party investigation. And so I ended up going to that. And I just felt as though everyone was no longer talking to me. I started feeling isolated. And at the third-party investigation, he was asking me about what happened. And then I said to him, is there at any point that you're going to ask me how this has affected me? Or how about my friend who I called at 4 a.m? And what's your experience with dealing with cases like this? And he couldn't really answer any of those questions. It's almost like he didn't really want to hear it. So I left it at that. And they wanted to do a second investigation with this particular third-party investigator. And I just said no, because I felt like nothing was happening after this. Like no one was taking action. And then my employer asked me to hire a third party to do workplace bullying, harassment, and sexual harassment training. So I hired a trainer. The trainer was paid. She came into town. And then when she arrived in the city, they completely canceled the training. And
Really?
so at this, I was diagnosed with PTSD. The only thing that my doctor could prescribe for me was sleeping pills to try and sleep better. And I was like, well, I'm not going to take a pill because I was drugged, and that's kind of making it worse, right?
Right.
So,
yeah.
And then I was seeing a therapist at the time, and two, actually, at the time. And although it was helpful, the one therapist had said to me, or I had asked her, so how long does PTSD last? And how can I get through this? And she says to me, well, PTSD will end when you decide it ends. I'm like, okay. So I decided it ends now. That was great. That helped with my certain thinking. I was spiraling less, but it was still in my body, right? And I felt as though, I reported this incident. My employer did nothing. It felt like they made my entire experience at work, this job that I really enjoyed, they just made it so difficult that I just had to leave. I had no choice. Like, it was completely unsupportive. Like, I even had a manager, or sorry, one of the owners ask me, like, how are you going to make sure this never happens again? I'm like, okay, but I didn't know I was being drugged. I thought I can actually trust people, right? So my experience with my employer was just as traumatizing, if not more, than the original incident. It was just compounding everything.
Yeah.
And so I ended up taking time off work. I think this was about 8 months after. And like, my weight loss was so severe. I had people asking if I had cancer, and I just couldn't keep on the weight, and had just depression and insomnia, panic attacks, and at one point even like suicidal thoughts, thinking, oh my gosh, is this what I have to do for my employer to believe me? Right? Not even realizing at the time that 33% of women who are sexually assaulted actually contemplate suicide. Right? And yeah, so it was just incredible to experience many roadblocks and being isolated and completely not supported from my employer.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm just so sorry that you had to go through that, and that I think it's great that you had a friend that you could reach out to, but that doesn't take away any of the pain and the trauma and everything that you had to go through. And then it sounds like the workplace made it even worse, like made you like the person that caused it or something, like, which is not right at all. So I'm just so sorry that you had to go through that. That's just awful. Yeah,
Thank you. But what I did realize was, as I saw, a psychotherapist, and I did CBT, and I did a whole bunch of different things, and that was great. But I felt like it wasn't I wasn't embodied my healing. My nervous system was still kind of out of whack. I was still jumping when I heard the toaster, for instance. And that's when I started working with the subconscious to be able to actually get through the story. Like, for instance, prior to me telling this story, I would tell it with uncontrollably crying. Like, I couldn't even get through the story. Now that I've done this work with the subconscious, which is 90% of our operating system, where our behavior and change comes from, it's been an absolute life changer for me. And even speaking with another woman from out west, where she witnessed a tragedy with one of her workers, she used a similar process that I use to be able to heal, where I feel, just to say to speakers, like, it's okay if you kind of look outside of the box for different ways in which to heal, right? And right, like, even for instance, I'm at a place right now where I can actually look back on my situation with gratitude. Doesn't mean I liked what happened. There's a lot of things I did not like, but I can look back at it with gratitude in the way like this. If this didn't happen, I wouldn't be who I am today, with this confidence, with this amount of personal safety that I feel, with this amount of regulation. I never would have been able to be who I am today if I didn't experience that terror and fear and abandonment from my employer. And I know not everyone can have that perspective, but that's where I am now. And I feel that, my role is to educate others. Hey, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in workplaces to be able to support employees, because no employee should ever have to feel like that in any workplace.
100%. And again, you have such a positive outlook on things. Like, I think you're such a brave, positive, amazing person to have went through all that. Basically sounds like on your own, and then now able to speak about it and like share it in a positive way. Like, that's amazing. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
If you could go back and maybe like put yourself in your employer's position, what would you have done to support you? Like,
great question. I would have listened, because, and I've thought so much about that, where if they thought that I lied, maybe putting themselves in my shoes, why would this woman come forward, risk her sense of self, and actually talking about this sensitive subject to us if she were lying? Why would she do that? Why would she risk what we might think, our judgment? Like, why would she do that if she was lying? Right? Maybe we need to get a little bit more curious and ask ourselves, well, what if this is true? Right? And maybe even looking at how this bullying and harassment are mental health hazards, just like asbestos is a physical hazard. You can't see the damage right away, right? And just acknowledging that, what if this is true, that this woman is saying this?
Absolutely. Yeah. Not instantly just thinking, oh, she's not telling the truth. Like, having an open mind and just being like, oh no, what if this is, absolutely, just believing and listening. And 100%. Should companies have like a trained professional, kind of, not a consultant, but someone kind of available to their employees? Like, do you think that's an important thing for companies to think about, is to have someone, like, resources available? Like, if they can't personally maybe help, like, say, well, I'm here to listen, but also we have this wonderfully trained person who's knowledgeable on things like this, that we have them available to speak to, or something, like, not to fluff it off onto someone else, but to give like more as like a resource. Would that be something that workplaces could do?
Absolutely. And I think that would be such a great resource if the budget is there, and it would make such a big difference, right? Because if you're going through that process, okay, then you're potentially paying for a third party investigator, but then having that resource for that employee, speaking with someone who is trained and understands the dynamics of what's going on, and, the symptoms of trauma and how it shows up, that could, potentially support an employee so much so that they're not feeling like they're broken into pieces, right? And then that could also bypass a WSIB claim, right? Which at the end of the day, that's a lot of money, right? Why not spend it to support that employee instead of this potential claim or potential something coming out in the news or on social media, right?
Yeah, I hate to turn this into a negative question, but it seemed like you were not interrogated, but not supported in a great way. Was the person who actually assaulted you, did they have to go through anything? Were they treated at all in a bad way?
Nope, not at all. And I don't know if they thought he was just such a good operator and all of these things, but there was nothing that happened to him. However, with a caveat, I did end up taking my employer and the employee to the Human Rights Tribunal because I didn't know what else to do. And so once I did that, what I loved was on the application, it said, what non-monetary compensation would you like to see? Like a resolution. I'm like, this is the best question. I love this. So in the human rights order, that particular employee had to go to consent training, workplace, sexual assault training, toxic, I don't think it was toxic masculinity, but something like that, but mainly about consent. And here's what happens when you're doing this to a woman. This is the effects of this, in hopes that he doesn't do it to anyone else again. So he can really understand the actions of his behavior. So that was just an action that I took in hopes to help him.
Yeah, and maybe that's a way also that workplaces can do the training with everyone, do it as a group, do it with every employee so that everyone's aware, and maybe it would help share ways that you can support someone this person is all of a sudden acting in a way they weren't before. How can we support this person without fully knowing what they went through? Because someone might not want to share those details with you, but still sharing ways that you can support them.
Absolutely.
So do you have any, tips for how we can keep each other safe? Maybe we're out as a group, like a workplace group or something, and just keeping each other safe?
I've thought a lot about this. And there was a great book, and I can't remember the title, of course, right now, but it's by Gavin de Becker, and it's talking about fear. But his whole message in his book, because he does investigations of people that were in really horrible situations, what does it come down to? We have intuition. This is like having a personal bodyguard with us at all times, right? If we're listening to our intuition, whether it makes sense or not, it's there specifically to help us and to guide us and to get us out of bad situations. I feel like that's paramount and that's number one. And yes, being with other people that are trusted, it's less likely to happen as well. But also even understanding consent and understanding, yes, I get that I was in a very much male-dominated industry, and if employers can incorporate just mutual respect and, literally adding all of that into their program that they need to be training employees on anyways, but not just documenting it, actually living it, right? Because culture is different than just having a health and safety program, right?
Yes.
And if an employee is affected by a workplace culture, they're not going to be creative, they're not going to be fully present, and they're not going to feel safe, right? And to me, it's all about the culture, right? That's either going to dictate this employee feels safe or they don't feel safe, right? And that will be a direct reflection in their own nervous system.
Yes, if people don't feel safe, they're not going to share ideas freely. They're not going to engage in the same way. They're not going to work in the same way. Absolutely. So if you could leave one thing with people, whether it's an employer listening or like a fellow employee, what would you like to leave with people?
Ooh, I'd like to leave with employees and employers is that your workplace culture is going to dictate so much. And what that means is, whether employees can come to you, do they feel safe or do they not feel safe? Because if you allocate those resources to make it a safe employment for people, and this will save you money, right? At the end of the day, because of course, a company needs to make money. However, it is such a positive investment is to create that culture of safety. And I mean, it's almost as if so many, construction or kind of industries, there's certain industries where I feel like they're 10, 20, 30 years behind in the thinking of today, where no, that's no longer acceptable, right? So I feel like there's a bit of a gap there. And yet there's so many positive impacts that a company can have with having a culture that has leadership or management training, where employees feel safe to speak up. Like, this can actually help your bottom line, right? Working as a team rather than so individually, right?
Right. Yes, absolutely. If someone's listening to this and they want to maybe connect with you or learn more, I don't know if you have a website or any social media kind of related to this, or is there a good way for people to reach out to you?
Yeah, the best way to reach out would be at truenorthcoaching.org. That's actually the business that I have, actually helping people through subconscious work, which is what I experienced that propelled me forward, working through my own trauma and limiting beliefs and so on. But that would be the best way to look me up if anyone has any questions or comments or anything like that.
Oh, that's amazing. Mm-hmm. I'll include the link then to your website for sure, so that people can learn more about you and read up on you and reach out maybe if they have any questions or, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. But maybe just lastly here, like the right people, whether it's your Threads of Life community or that employer that really cares and you feel supported, the right people can be the sunshine that lifts us up and the water that nourishes us and the warmth that reminds us we don't have to be alone in our own grieving or fear or growth when we have the right support system.
Oh, that's a beautiful way to end. I appreciate how you've went through so much and you're still so positive and able to speak about these, like share details about your father, share details about your own workplace violence story. I appreciate that so much, because I think people go through these things and they can't speak about it. And I don't know if it's healing to speak about it in this way, but I think it's just a really great way for us to learn more about, safety and how we treat people. And yeah, so I appreciate you so much. And thank you so much for sharing your stories.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Wow. S.T.A.R.